In The Reason for the Accident, where you deal with the effects of ordinary events coalescing, such lines as, "We passed the crossroads where James Dean's speeding Porsche pulled out in front of his rocketing career," indicate the intensity and imagistic nature of much of your work. Your images are so precise that they seem to indicate much fine-tuning in your editorial process. Are they as spontaneous as your quote, "writing without a plan" would indicate, or are they really hard work and a balance between editing and spontaneity?
Well, yes, the latter.
The latter.
They are, I just write, and then, I just write, and then I go back later, I give myself some time, because I like to float on that feeling of accomplishment, and so I go back weeks or months later and pick out things. Then they stand out as if I'm reading someone else's work. And so things jump out at me, and then I take those and I work with those, and push them all together.
Well, that's a relief to know.
Why?
Well, the images, like the image that I pointed out, are just wonderful, and I really like them, and that's all. But on to my next question. Much of your poetry, as in The Art of Sleeping Alone, drops us from one reality to another. The line is, "Her sloping ribs, the jut of her hip, he stretched out an arm and laid his hand on a distant hill." Now, like you drop out of one place into another, and into an unexpected kind of reality. Is this a conscious process on your part, or is it part of the magic of the poetic process?
Well, I didn't think about that when I wrote. I just that poem I wrote fairly quickly. It wasn't one I worked over a lot. And it is at the back of the book. It's at the end. And and it was the newest poem that I'd written when the book was published. When you publish a book, it's usually you're going back years and gathering things together. And that was the most recent poem that I'd written when the book was glued together. And I put it there because I wanted that. It was for me saying, that's where I'm going. I'm going somewhere new, I hope. We'll see. But as far as those things are little gifts, they just, I don't know.
They're magic in some ways.
Yeah, it's the magic of language, I think.
Okay, I noticed at the beginning of Candy from Strangers, during the first lyric section of the book, these statements: Madam Butterfly, Sepku, the white pebbles Chinese in bed, kimonos, Basho's fur. Now, there seems to be a lot of, a thread of Oriental reference or theme in a lot of your work, and this would indicate a fascination. What have you found in Oriental literature and art that is absent in Western literature and art?
I love that. I love the quietness. I love the quietness and the subtlety and the extreme refinement of sensibility that I find in Japanese writing and in Basho's writing. And of course I read all these different translations. They're all so different. There's so much the translator's soul, so I don't know what I'm getting. I'd like to know what I'm getting. I actually took a Japanese course. I took a beginning Japanese course. It would take me years and years to be able to start reading poetry or receiving poetry. It's the highest. There's so much air and space around their writing. That's what I really like. And I've spent years trying to cram things together. And so I love that. I love that. And when I go back and read that poetry, the haiku and the Renga series, the great classics, I can read them over and over again. There's two books actually translated and compiled by Kenneth Rexroth. 100 poems from the Chinese, 100 poems from the Japanese. Are you familiar with that?
I've seen both of them.
Yeah, they're great. And I like him very much as a translator. I don't know what the original is, but I love what he does. And I can read those poems over and over again, and they just keep feeding me. That's what's great about that stuff.
Now, fairy tales and Oriental literature are influences. What other major influences have you had on your writing?
Oh, yikes. Well, I mean, there are poets that have influenced me a great deal. First of all, I mean, this is I've not ever admitted this, but Sylvia Plath, when I was starting out, I just sort of, you know, absorbed her through my pores. All that anger and bitterness and cleverness. I just absorbed it. Maybe I got it out of my system because I wrote for a year those kinds of poems. And, you know, I hope I got it out of my system, because I don't think anger generally and self-righteousness has I don't think it works in poetry. I just don't think it works. I want to go beyond that in my life and in my poetry.
So it's sort of a search for the omniscient character that you find in fairy tales, almost, you know.
You mean inhuman or above human?
No, someone that's just watching and calmly watching.
Yeah.
An observer.
Yeah.
Now, many of our really top-notch Canadian writers, Paulette Giles, Ernst Havelman, yourself, are expatriate citizens of the United States, and as in Ernst's case, of South Africa. What was the catalyst that made your decision to make Canada your home?
I came here during the Vietnam War with my husband and daughter. We decided to stay. We were just visiting friends. We decided to stay because of what it is like here. And I am very glad and very grateful that I live here. I can't imagine what other turn my life could have taken. It just seems perfect. I feel very blessed to have found this valley. It feels totally like home to me. I was raised in the woods as a child. I mean, I lived in the country, in the bush, as they say here in Canada. And so it feels very much like home.
What effect does your geographical location have on your writing? Like, I know you live in a cabin up at New Denver, and it's a really woodsy setting. I was up there once a few years ago. And what effect, first, does it have on your art, and second, on the business involved with your art?
Well, we were talking earlier about living frugally, and I do live frugally, but in the country, you're surrounded by beauty. And I have to have that. I mean, I have to have that. And the other thing that has been very influential on me, the other writer, is Fred Waugh. And Fred Waugh showed me, just by his own writing, that any place that you live is the place, or capital P, the place, the holy place. It's there if we can see that. So he made me see that with his own writing. He showed me that this is the sacred ground right here. And this is where art is made, right here. When we read the greats, we reify them into people, into gods that didn't live, they lived somewhere else, always somewhere else, some other place. And what I appreciate about living here and coming here is that I met Fred, and all the people that he drew here. You know, I mean, I've never heard a bad word said about Fred, and you know, and poets are not known to hold their tongue, you know. So, yeah.
Now, another thing I've noticed is most Canadian poetry strives for the apolitical. Is there a political place in your poetry? in light of world problems or ecological conditions.
Yeah. Every time I try to stick it in, I haven't been able to write out of my center yet a political poem per se. And because it doesn't feel right. If I either feel righteous or presumptuous, it just doesn't work for me. It doesn't mean that I'm not concerned about those things. And it's, you know, I think, of course I think about it, and of course I read a lot, you know, what the role of the artist is, you know. And if I was living in the streets of, I don't know, Belfast, I mean, if I was right in the thick of something, I don't think I'd be writing poetry anyway. I mean, that question is not answered. I have not answered that question for myself yet about politics in my own writing.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.